Flames licked at the rafters of the old Hanson barn as Willow Bennett frantically tried to find a way out, the smoke stinging her eyes and burning her lungs. This wasn't how she'd imagined her new life in Ruby City, Idaho would begin in the spring of 1878. Willow had arrived in the frontier mining town just 3 weeks earlier, hoping to escape the suffocating confines of Boston society and the unwanted advances of a powerful banker twice her age. Her Aunt Harriet had written glowing letters about the opportunities for a young woman with education in the growing Western territories. Teaching positions were abundant, and Harriet had secured her a post at the newly established Ruby City schoolhouse. But now, as the flames grew higher around her, Willow wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd only come to the Hanson farm to deliver some books for the children who lived here. Mrs. Hanson had stepped out to fetch water from the well, leaving Willow to wait in the barn where it was cooler than the house. That's when she'd noticed the smell of smoke, and within minutes, the dry hay had become a raging inferno. Help! She screamed, though she knew the farmhouse was too far away for anyone to hear over the roaring flames. Willow's throat burned from the smoke and shouting as she backed toward the center of the barn. The main doors had already been consumed by fire, and the small side door was blocked by a fallen, burning beam. Outside the barn, Bartholomew Bart Vaughn was returning from a cattle drive when he spotted the smoke rising from the Hanson place. At 26, Bart had already earned a reputation as one of the finest horsemen and cattle hands in the territory. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with sun-weathered skin and intense blue eyes urged his horse forward at a gallop, his heart pounding with dread. He had seen fire destroy entire towns in the dry western climate, and the Hanson farm was dangerously close to the forest that bordered Ruby City. As he approached, he could see Martha Hanson frantically running toward the barn with a bucket of water, a futile gesture against the growing conflagration. "Mrs. Hanson," Bart called out, leaping from his horse. "Is anyone inside? The teacher, Miss Bennett, Mrs." Hanson cried, her face contorted with horror. She was waiting in the barn. "Oh Lord, I forgot she was there." Without hesitation, Bart tore off his bandana and soaked it in the horse trough. He tied the wet cloth around his face, covering his nose and mouth, and pulled his hat down low over his eyes. "Get back to the house and ring the bell for help," he ordered Mrs. Hanson, "and keep away from the barn." Inside, Willow had torn strips from her petticoat and soaked them in a water bucket used for the horses. She tied one around her face and used another to shield her hands as she tried to move smaller pieces of burning debris, searching desperately for a way out. The heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke thicker by the second. A terrible crack from above made her look up just in time to see a burning rafter crashing down. She threw herself backward, falling hard onto the dirt floor, narrowly avoiding being crushed. "Hello, is anyone in here?" A muffled male voice called from somewhere beyond the wall of flames. "Here, I'm here," Willow shouted, her voice breaking from the strain and smoke. Bart followed the sound of her voice, pushing through the barn door that was now engulfed in flames. The heat hit him like a physical blow, and he squinted through the smoke, trying to locate the trapped woman. "Keep talking," he shouted. "I'll find you, I'm in the center," Willow called back, coughing violently. "The beams are falling." Bart ducked under a burning crossbeam and leaped over a pile of flaming hay. Through the thick smoke, he finally spotted her, a slender figure in a soot-stained blue dress, pressed against a support post as flames encircled her. "I'm coming to you," he called. "Don't move." Willow stared in disbelief as a tall man materialized through the smoke and flames. She couldn't make out his features through the bandana covering his face, but she saw determination in his eyes. Without wasting a second, Bart reached her side. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the roar of the fire. "No, just trapped," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I'm getting you out of here. Hold on to me." Bart quickly assessed their situation. The main door was completely consumed by fire, and debris blocked the path they'd need to take. Making a split-second decision, he removed his leather coat and wrapped it around Willow. "Cover your face with this," he instructed, pulling the coat over her head like a hood. "And stay close to me," Willow nodded, too terrified to speak. Bart swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than he'd expected, or perhaps it was the surge of strength that came from knowing her life depended on him. Take a deep breath when I tell you, he said, plotting their escape route. A section of the wall had begun to collapse, creating a potential exit if they could reach it quickly enough. Now, Willow filled her lungs as best she could, and Bart charged toward the opening. The heat was excruciating, flames licking at his shirt and singeing his hair. A burning timber crashed down just behind them, sending embers flying through the air. With a final burst of strength, Bart leaped through the gap in the wall, the momentum carrying them several feet before he stumbled to his knees on the hard, packed earth outside. He immediately rolled with Willow in his arms to extinguish any flames that might have caught on their clothing. For several seconds, they lay there gasping for air, the cool spring breeze a blessed relief after the inferno. Bart carefully unwrapped the coat from around Willow's head. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice hoarse from smoke. Willow looked up at her rescuer for the first time, taking in his soot-streaked face, the intense blue eyes that showed concern, and the strong jawline now visible as he pulled down his bandana. Something fluttered in her chest that had nothing to do with smoke or fear. "Thanks to you," she managed to say between coughs. "You saved my life." Before Bart could respond, Mrs. Hanson came running toward them, followed by her husband and several neighbors who had seen the smoke. "Oh, Miss Bennett, thank the Lord you're safe," Mrs. Hanson cried, kneeling beside them. The next hours passed in a blur as more townspeople arrived to help fight the fire. By nightfall, they had managed to save the farmhouse, though the barn was a complete loss. The doctor had examined both Bart and Willow, prescribing rest and plenty of fluids for their smoke-filled lungs. Willow sat on the Hansons' porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, watching as Bart helped the men secure the perimeter to ensure no embers would reignite. He had refused to leave until he was certain the danger had passed completely, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Mr. Vaughn is a true hero," Mrs. Hanson said, bringing Willow a cup of tea. "Not the first time he's put himself in danger to help others, either. 3 winters ago, he rescued the Wilkinson children when they got lost in a blizzard, tracked them for miles in the snow." Willow watched the tall cowboy directing the other men, his movements purposeful despite his weariness. "I never even properly thanked him," she said softly. "Oh, you'll have time for that," Mrs. Hanson replied with a knowing smile. "Bart isn't one to seek gratitude, but I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when he carried you from that barn." Willow felt her cheeks warm, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "I don't even know him," she protested weakly. "Well, there's no better way to know a man's character than seeing how he acts when life and death hang in the balance," Mrs. Hanson said sagely, "and Bartholomew Vaughn just showed you exactly who he is." Later that night, after the fire was fully extinguished and most of the neighbors had returned home, Bart approached the porch where Willow still sat, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. "Miss Bennett," he said, removing his hat. Up close, she could see the angry red burns on his forearms and the singed edges of his hair. "I wanted to check that you were truly all right before I headed back to my place." "Mr. Vaughn," Willow said, standing to face him, "I owe you my life. I don't know how I can ever repay such a debt." Bart shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "No debt to repay, miss. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Willow replied firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. You risked your life for a stranger." Bart looked slightly uncomfortable with her praise. "Well, we're not strangers anymore, are we, Miss Bennett?" Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in fire and danger. "No," she said softly, "I suppose we're not." "I understand you're our new school teacher," Bart said, changing the subject. "How are you finding Ruby City so far, apart from burning barns, that is?" Despite everything, Willow found herself laughing. "It's certainly more exciting than Boston," she admitted. "Though I could do with a little less excitement of today's variety." "Boston," Bart raised an eyebrow. "That's a long way from Idaho territory. What brings a city lady out to our rough corner of the world?" Willow hesitated, unsure how much to share with this man she'd just met, yet who had already seen her at her most vulnerable. "I wanted adventure," she finally said, "and independence." "Both are in short supply for women back east," Bart nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, we've got plenty of both out here, too much sometimes." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional pop from the smoldering remains of the barn. Mr. Hanson mentioned you work at the Diamond K Ranch, Willow said eventually. That's right. Foreman there for the past 2 years. Before that, I drove cattle up from Texas, did some scouting for the Army. He shrugged modestly. Been on horseback since before I could walk, or so my father used to say. He must be very proud of you. A shadow passed across Bart's face. He passed on during the war, Confederate side. I'm sorry, Willow said sincerely. It was a long time ago, Bart replied, his expression clearing. But I should be heading back. The ranch hands will be wondering what happened to me. He settled his hat back on his head. Miss Bennett, it was a pleasure meeting you despite the circumstances. Mr. Vaughn, Willow said impulsively, would you? That is, I'd very much like to thank you properly. Perhaps you could call on me at my aunt's house in town sometime. For tea or supper, Bart looked surprised, then pleased. I'd be honored, Miss Bennett. Sunday after church, perhaps, Willow nodded, smiling. Sunday would be perfect. As Bart mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness, Willow couldn't help but think that her adventure in the West had truly begun not with her journey from Boston or her first day of teaching, but with flames and smoke and the strong arms of a cowboy who had carried her to safety. The next few days were a flurry of activity as Willow recovered from her ordeal and prepared for her first official day of teaching. Her Aunt Harriet fussed over her, applying salve to the minor burns on her hands and brewing herbal teas to soothe her throat. That Bart Vaughn, Harriet said, shaking her head as she poured more tea, always been a bit of a lone wolf, keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a man in Ruby City more respected. You know him well? Willow asked, trying to sound casual. Everyone knows everyone in a town this size, dear, Harriet replied with a knowing smile. But Bart's been coming into my general store for years, never says much, always polite, pays his debts promptly, the kind of man you want around in hard times. Willow nodded, absorbing this information. He mentioned he'd like to call on Sunday after church. Harriet paused in her bustling, eyebrows raised in surprise. Did he now? Well, Bart Vaughn hasn't called on a lady since. Well, I can't recall him ever calling on anyone. This revelation made Willow feel oddly special, though she tried to dismiss the feeling. It's only to be polite, I'm sure, after what happened. Of course, dear, Harriet said, not sounding convinced. Well, I'll make my special apple pie then. Man rides 15 miles from the Diamond K into town every Sunday for church. Least we can do is feed him properly. Sunday seemed both too distant and approaching too quickly. Willow's first days at the schoolhouse were challenging but rewarding. The children of Ruby City, from the weathered ranch hands, offspring to the more refined children of the mine owners and merchants, were eager for education. They treated the new teacher from the city with a mixture of awe and curiosity. By Friday, most of the town had heard the story of the barn fire and Bart's heroic rescue. Willow found herself the recipient of curious glances and kind inquiries about her health. She answered politely, but felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. At the end of the school day, as Willow was gathering her materials, a young girl named Emma lingered at her desk. Miss Bennett, she said shyly, is it true that Mr. Vaughn carried you through fire, like in the storybooks? Willow smiled gently at the child. Yes, Emma, Mr. Vaughn was very brave. He saved my life. Emma's eyes widened. Pa says Mr. Vaughn is the best horseman in the territory and can track anything across the mountains. He says if you're lost, there's no one better to find you. Your father sounds wise, Willow replied, touched by the child's admiration for her rescuer. Mr. Vaughn teaches some of us older kids to ride sometimes, Emma continued. He's real patient, not like some of the other cowboys. Never yells, even when Billy Peters fell off 3 times in one lesson. Willow listened attentively as Emma shared more stories about Bart, each one adding to the picture forming in her mind of this quiet, capable man who seemed to command such respect from everyone who knew him. When Sunday finally arrived, Willow found herself unusually nervous as she dressed for church. She chose her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair and brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. She pinned her hair up neatly, but allowed a few soft curls to frame her face, then immediately felt foolish for taking such care with her appearance. This was merely a thank-you dinner, not a social call of any significance. The small wooden church was filled to capacity when Willow and Harriet arrived. They took seats near the back, and Willow found herself scanning the congregation for a certain tall figure. She spotted him on the opposite side, standing respectfully as the preacher began the service. Bart was dressed in clean, pressed clothes, his usually unruly dark hair slicked back. Even from across the room, he cut an impressive figure, standing a head taller than most men around him. As if sensing her gaze, Bart turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement, and Willow felt her cheeks warm as she nodded back. After the service, the churchgoers gathered outside to socialize, a weekly tradition in the small community. Willow found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious townspeople eager to hear firsthand about her rescue. It was terrifying, she admitted to Mrs. Parker, the banker's wife, but Mr. Vaughn appeared just when all seemed lost. "I'll never forget the sight of him coming through those flames. Speaking of your hero," Mrs. Parker said, glancing over Willow's shoulder with a smile, "he seems to be looking for someone." Willow turned to see Bart making his way through the crowd toward them. He'd put his hat back on, shielding his eyes from the bright spring sun, but she could still see the intensity in his gaze as he approached. "Miss Bennett," he said with a polite nod, removing his hat. "Mrs. Parker." "Mr. Vaughn," both women replied in unison. "I hope you're recovering well," he said to Willow, his deep voice carrying genuine concern. "Much better, thank you," she replied. "And your burns," Bart shrugged dismissively. "Healing fine, frontier life toughens the skin, Mrs. Parker looked between them with undisguised interest before making a flimsy excuse about needing to find her husband. As she walked away, Bart seemed to relax slightly. "I was hoping our invitation for Sunday dinner still stands," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that Willow found endearing from such a capable man. "Of course," she assured him. "Aunt Harriet has been cooking since dawn. I believe she's determined to fatten you up as a reward for your heroism." A smile tugged at the corner of Bart's mouth. "Well, I won't refuse good home cooking. The ranch cook means well, but his idea of a vegetable is a potato that's not been boiled to mush." Willow laughed, surprised by his dry humor. "Then you're in for a treat. Aunt Harriet grows her own garden and is quite proud of her spring vegetables." They walked together to where Harriet was chatting with the town mayor, Bart maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless felt intimate in the crowded churchyard. Several people nodded approvingly as they passed, making Willow acutely aware of the small town's watchful eyes. Dinner at Harriet's comfortable home was initially somewhat stiff, with Bart answering Harriet's curious questions politely but briefly. However, as the meal progressed, he gradually relaxed, revealing a thoughtful, articulate man beneath the taciturn cowboy exterior. "So you've been in Idaho territory how long, Mr. Vaughn?" Harriet asked, serving him a second helping of roast beef. "Going on 5 years now, madam," Bart replied. "Came up from Colorado after working the silver mines there for a spell, found I prefer open sky to tunnels." "And before Colorado?" Willow asked, genuinely curious about his past. Bart hesitated, then answered honestly. "Texas, mostly. After the war things were difficult in Virginia where I grew up. My mother passed, the family farm was lost to taxes. I headed west like so many others, looking for a fresh start." Willow nodded sympathetically. "Many came to Boston after the war as well, looking for work and new beginnings." "The war touched everyone," Harriet said solemnly. "My husband, God rest him, never came home from Gettysburg." A moment of respectful silence fell over the table, acknowledgement of shared national grief still fresh for many. "Miss Bennett tells me you teach writing to some of the children," Bart said, clearly wanting to change the subject to something lighter. "Just informal lessons," Bart explained. "Some of the town kids don't get much chance to learn proper horsemanship. Figure it's a necessary skill out here." "That's very kind of you," Willow said. "Emma Thompson speaks very highly of your teaching." Bart looked embarrassed by the praise. "Just passing on what my father taught me. He had a way with horses that I've never seen matched." The conversation flowed more easily after that, touching on everything from the spring cattle drive preparations to Willow's experiences teaching in the one-room schoolhouse. Before anyone realized, hours had passed and the afternoon light was beginning to fade. "I should be heading back to the ranch," Bart said reluctantly, rising from his chair. "It's a fair ride and I've got men waiting on instructions for tomorrow's work." Of course, Harriet said, gathering plates. But you must come again, Mr. Vaughn. It's been a pleasure having a man's conversation at the table again. I'd like that, madam, if it's not an imposition, Bart replied, his eyes shifting to Willow. Not at all, Willow assured him. In fact, I was hoping. That is, I've been told there's a lovely view from Carson's Ridge. I've been wanting to explore more of the area, but Aunt Harriet worries about me wandering alone. As she should, Bart said seriously. The territory has its dangers, even close to town. Perhaps, Willow suggested, gathering her courage, you might accompany me sometime, as a guide, of course. Bart's expression brightened. I'd be honored, Miss Bennett. Next Saturday, perhaps, if you're free. Saturday would be perfect, Willow agreed, trying to contain her excitement. As Bart prepared to leave, he turned to Willow at the door. Miss Bennett, I've been meaning to ask, what brought you to the barn that day? Mrs. Hanson mentioned something about books. Oh, Willow exclaimed. The primers for the Hanson children. In all the excitement, I completely forgot. They were in my satchel, which I left in the barn. All lost in the fire, I'm afraid, Bart said regretfully. Willow sighed. Those were the only extra copies I had. The children will have to share with others now until more can be ordered from Boys. Bart considered this problem. I'm riding to Boys next week on ranch business. I could place an order for you, bring them back when I return. You do that? Willow asked, touched by the offer. Least I can do, Bart replied with a small smile. Can't have our schoolchildren falling behind in their studies. As he settled his hat on his head and stepped onto the porch, he turned back. Until Saturday, Miss Bennett. Until Saturday, Mr. Vaughn, Willow replied, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away, his straight-backed silhouette gradually disappearing down the dusty street. Well, said Harriet from behind her, a note of amusement in her voice. I believe the entire town will be talking by tomorrow about how Bartholomew Vaughn is courting the new schoolteacher. He's not courting me, Willow protested, closing the door and turning to face her aunt. He's simply being kind to a newcomer. My dear, Harriet said with a knowing smile, I've known that man for 5 years, and I've never seen him voluntarily extend a conversation beyond what's strictly necessary. Today, he stayed for 3 hours and offered to ride all the way to Boys to fetch school primers. If that's not interest, I don't know what is. Willow couldn't suppress the flutter of hope in her chest, though she tried to remain practical. Even if he is interested, I came west to establish myself independently, not to find a husband. And who says you can't do both? Harriet countered, patting her niece's hand. Independence doesn't have to mean loneliness, my dear, just something to consider. The week passed slowly for Willow, each day filled with teaching and settling into her new role in the community. She found herself looking forward to Saturday with growing anticipation, wondering if her aunt might be right about Bart's intentions. When Saturday morning finally arrived, Willow dressed carefully in a practical riding outfit, a divided skirt that Harriet had insisted was essential for frontier life, along with a crisp white blouse and sturdy boots. She braided her hair to keep it secure under her wide-brimmed hat, designed to protect her fair skin from the harsh western sun. Bart arrived precisely at the agreed time, leading not only his own mount but a second horse, a gentle-looking chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. Good morning, Miss Bennett, he said, removing his hat briefly. This is Daisy. She's the steadiest mare at the Diamond K, perfect for a ride into the foothills. Willow approached the horse cautiously. She's beautiful. I should warn you, though, I haven't ridden much since I was a girl. My father kept horses, but Boston society ladies rarely have occasion to ride, except in the park at a sedate pace. Bart's eyes crinkled with amusement. Daisy won't give you any trouble, and I figured we'd take it slow, let you get accustomed again. The ridge isn't going anywhere. With Bart's help, Willow mounted the horse, surprised at how naturally the old skills came back to her. They set off at an easy walk, Bart pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area as they rode. That's Prospector's Creek, he said, indicating a small stream they crossed. Legend says the first gold in these parts was found there by a half-starved miner who stopped for water. Story goes he was so excited he ran all the way to the nearest settlement without his boots. Willow laughed, finding it easy to relax in Bart's company. And was there really gold? Enough to start the rush that built Ruby City, Bart confirmed. Though the real wealth turned out to be silver, the mountains are full of it. That's what keeps the town going now that the easy gold is played out. As they rode higher into the foothills, the landscape opened up dramatically. Willow marveled at the panoramic views of forests, meadows, and distant snow-capped peaks. "It's breathtaking," she said softly as they paused to rest the horses. "So different from the east. Everything seems bigger here." "That's what I love about it," Bart agreed, his gaze taking in the vast landscape. "Room to breathe, room to be yourself without anyone crowding you." "Is that why you stayed? After all your travels?" Bart considered the question seriously. "Partly. Also found good people here, work that matters." He glanced at her. "What about you? Will you stay in Ruby City, or is this just a stopping point on your journey west?" Willow hadn't considered the question before. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I came seeking independence and adventure, but also purpose. Teaching gives me that. As for whether Ruby City is where I'll put down roots." She met his eyes. "I'm still deciding." Something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition that her decision might now involve factors she hadn't initially considered. They continued their ride, eventually reaching Carson's Ridge, a dramatic outcropping of rock overlooking the valley where Ruby City nestled like a collection of toy buildings. Bart helped Willow dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. They spread a blanket Bart had brought, and Willow unpacked the lunch Harriet had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a flask of lemonade. As they ate, Bart pointed out various landmarks visible from their vantage point: the silver mines in the distance, the meandering river that provided water for the town, the Diamond K ranch lands spreading across the valley floor. "It's strange to think," Willow said, "that just a week ago I nearly died in that barn if you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," Bart said firmly, his blue eyes intense, "and you're here now." "Why did you do it?" Willow asked suddenly. "Rush into a burning building for someone you didn't even know?" Bart looked surprised by the question. "What else would I have done? Stood by and let you perish?" Many would have. It was incredibly dangerous. He shrugged, uncomfortable with her focus on his actions. "My father always said character is what you do when no one's watching, or when there's nothing in it for you. Couldn't have lived with myself if I hadn't tried." Willow studied his profile as he gazed out over the valley. The strong jaw, the slight cleft in his chin, the tiny scar near his right eyebrow, details she was coming to know well. "Well, I'm very glad you did," she said softly. "Not just because I'm alive, but because it led me to know you." Bart turned to her, surprise and something warmer in his expression. "I'm glad too," he said simply. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Willow felt certain he might kiss her. Instead, he cleared his throat and began packing away the remains of their lunch. "Should head back before too long," he explained. "Weather can change quick in the mountains, even in spring." As if to emphasize his point, a cool breeze swept across the ridge, and Willow noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "You're right," she agreed, though she felt a pang of disappointment. "Aunt Harriet will worry if we're caught in a storm." The ride back was companionable but quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Ruby City, the first droplets of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a steady downpour. "Come on," Bart called, urging their horses to a faster pace. "We're going to get soaked." By the time they reached Harriet's house, they were both drenched despite their efforts. Laughing and dripping on the porch, they unsaddled the horses and led them to the small stable behind the house. "You should come in and dry off," Willow insisted as they finished tending to the animals. "Aunt Harriet will have coffee ready, and you can wait out the worst of the storm." Bart hesitated, then nodded. Much obliged. Riding back to the Diamond K in this wouldn't be the wisest decision. Inside, Harriet fussed over them both, providing towels and hot coffee. She insisted Bart borrow some dry clothes that had belonged to her late husband while his own dried by the fire. "Caught in the rain, were you?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "Spring storms can be so unpredictable." "My fault entirely, Mrs. Bennett," Bart said apologetically. "Should have been watching the weather more carefully." "Nonsense," Willow objected. "I was having such a wonderful time, I wouldn't have wanted to cut it short either." The simple declaration hung in the air, more revealing than she had intended. Bart's eyes met hers over his coffee cup, and the warmth in them made her cheeks flush. Harriet, observing the exchange with barely concealed delight, announced that she needed to check on something in the kitchen, leaving them alone in the parlor. "I meant what I said," Willow said quietly once her aunt had gone. "Today was wonderful. Thank you for showing me the beauty of this place." "My pleasure," Bart replied, setting down his cup. "Though there's much more to see, the territory has wonders that would take a lifetime to explore." "I'd like that," Willow said, her heart beating faster. "To see more of it, I mean." Bart moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Willow," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I'm not a man of many words, and I'm certainly not sophisticated like the gentleman you probably knew back east, but I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd permit it." Willow felt a surge of happiness at his formal request. "I'd like that very much, Bart," she replied, deliberately using his first name as well. The rain continued to beat against the windows as they talked, learning more about each other's pasts and dreams for the future. Bart spoke of his hope to one day have his own ranch, while Willow shared her desire to eventually start a proper school with multiple classrooms and specialized teaching. "Education is so important out here," she explained passionately. "These children deserve the same opportunities as those in the eastern cities." "You're right," Bart agreed. "Most of us got by with the basics, if that. My own schooling was interrupted by the war, though my mother made sure I kept reading afterward. Not all children are so fortunate." "You surprise me, Mr. Vaughn," Willow said with a smile. "A cowboy who values education." "There's more to surviving out here than just physical strength," Bart replied seriously. "Mind needs exercise just as much as the body." By the time the rain finally slackened, Bart's clothes had dried, and the afternoon had stretched into early evening. He reluctantly announced that he needed to return to the ranch. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he said, rising from the sofa, "and I've got men expecting me back." "You're welcome anytime," Willow assured him, walking him to the door. "Perhaps next Sunday after church again. I'd like that," Bart said, his eyes lingering on her face. "Very much." Standing on the porch, partially sheltered from the light drizzle that still fell, Bart hesitated, then took Willow's hand in his. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "It is I who should thank you," Willow replied, equally quiet. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wished, Bart leaned down and placed a gentle, brief kiss on her lips. It was so quick and light that Willow barely had time to register the sensation before he stepped back. "Until Sunday," he said, settling his hat on his head. "Until Sunday," Willow echoed, her fingers touching her lips as she watched him ride away through the gentle rain. Over the next few weeks, Bart became a regular visitor at the Bennett household. Sunday dinners after church became a tradition, and often during the week, he would ride into town after school hours to accompany Willow on walks or to help with small tasks around her aunt's property. The town of Ruby City watched their courtship with approval and interest. Willow's students giggled whenever Bart stopped by the schoolhouse to escort her home, and the ladies of the town made a point of mentioning what a fine couple they made whenever Willow was within earshot. "You'd think they had nothing better to discuss," Willow commented one evening as she and Bart sat on the porch swing, enjoying the mild summer air. "Small towns run on gossip," Bart replied with a chuckle. "Better us than someone else, I suppose." "I just hope it doesn't interfere with my teaching," Willow said. "I want to be respected for my work, not just known as Bart Vaughn's lady friend." Bart's expression grew serious. "Is that what bothers you, being associated with me?" "No," Willow exclaimed, horrified that he'd misunderstood. "Not at all. I'm proud to be seen with you, Bart. I just meant I came west to establish myself independently, to be known for my own accomplishments." Bart nodded slowly, relief evident in his features. "I understand that. It's one of the things I admire most about you, your determination and sense of purpose." Willow squeezed his hand gratefully. "And I admire your understanding. Not many men would be so supportive of a woman's ambitions." "The West needs strong women just as much as it needs strong men," Bart said simply. "Maybe more so." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Bart was immediately on his feet, hand instinctively moving to where his gun would normally be holstered. A rider pulled up sharply in front of the house, one of the young hands from the Diamond K, breathless and clearly agitated. "Mr. Vaughn," he called out. "There's trouble at the ranch. Rustlers hit the north pasture. Mr. Kennedy sent me to fetch you right away." Bart's expression hardened. "Anyone hurt, Jimmy?" Pete took a bullet in the shoulder, not too bad, but they got away with near 30 head of prime beef. "Damn," Bart muttered, then glanced apologetically at Willow. "Excuse my language, but this is serious. Those cattle are scheduled for the drive to Boise next week." "Of course you must go," Willow said immediately, rising to stand beside him. "Will you be safe?" The concern in her voice touched him. "I'll be fine," he assured her, taking her hand briefly. "Cattle rustling is unfortunately part of ranch life. We'll track them down." "Be careful," she urged, not bothering to hide her worry. "Please." Bart's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I promise," he said quietly, then turned to Jimmy. "Ride back and tell Kennedy I'm right behind you. Have the men gather tracking gear and provisions for 3 days." As Jimmy galloped away, Bart turned back to Willow. "I'm sorry to cut our evening short." "Don't apologize," Willow said firmly. "This is your responsibility, I understand that." Bart hesitated, then pulled her into a quick embrace. "I'll send word when I return," he promised, before mounting his horse and riding swiftly away. The next 3 days were the longest of Willow's life. She went through the motions of teaching, but her mind constantly wandered to Bart and the dangers he might be facing. Cattle rustlers were known to be desperate, violent men, and confrontations often turned deadly. On the 3rd evening, just as Willow was preparing for bed, a knock came at the door. Harriet answered it to find a ranch hand from the Diamond K standing on the porch. "Evening, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Vaughn asked me to deliver this to Miss Bennett." He handed over a folded piece of paper, nodded politely, and departed. Harriet brought the note to Willow, who opened it with trembling fingers. "We recovered most of the cattle," the note read in Bart's strong handwriting. "All men safe, including me, will be tied up at the ranch for a few more days preparing for the drive to Boise. We'll call on you as soon as I return. Yours, Bart." The simple "yours" made Willow's heart skip a beat. She pressed the note to her chest, relief washing over her. "Good news?" Harriet asked, though she could clearly read the answer on her niece's face. "He's safe," Willow confirmed. "They got the cattle back." "That man is too capable for his own good," Harriet said with a smile. "The Diamond K is lucky to have him, though I suspect they won't keep him forever. A man like that eventually wants his own spread." Willow nodded absently, rereading the note. "He's going to Boise with the cattle drive. That could be weeks." "Part of loving a rancher, my dear," Harriet said gently. "They go where the work takes them." Willow looked up sharply. "Who said anything about love?" Harriet gave her a knowing look. "No one needed to say it. It's written all over your face whenever his name is mentioned." Willow couldn't deny it, not even to herself. Somewhere between being carried from that burning barn and now, she had fallen deeply in love with Bartholomew Vaughn. "What if he doesn't feel the same?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. Harriet sat beside her niece, patting her hand. "My dear, that man rides 15 miles into town at every opportunity just to spend an hour in your company. He faced down armed rustlers, and his first thought afterward was to send you a note so you wouldn't worry. If that's not love, I don't know what is." The cattle drive to Boise took nearly 3 weeks, during which Willow threw herself into her teaching and planning for the small school's future. She wrote long letters to Bart, giving them to the occasional riders who traveled between Ruby City and Boise, knowing they might reach him during his rare moments of rest. In late July, word came that the Diamond K Drive had successfully reached Boise and sold their cattle at excellent prices. The town buzzed with the news, as the ranch's prosperity affected everyone in the small community. Willow was in the schoolhouse late one afternoon, preparing lessons for the following week, when a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Bart standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. "Bart," she exclaimed, rising so quickly she knocked over her inkwell. She barely noticed the spreading stain as she rushed toward him. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, catching her in his arms and lifting her off her feet in a tight embrace. "God, I've missed you," he murmured into her hair. When he finally set her down, Willow could see the changes the trail had wrought in him. His skin was even more deeply tanned, his frame leaner, his eyes bearing the fatigue of weeks of vigilance and hard work. "You look exhausted," she said, touching his face gently. 3 weeks of sleeping on the ground will do that, he replied with a tired smile. Worth it, though. The drive was successful and Mr. Kennedy was generous with the bonuses. I'm so glad, Willow said sincerely, and even more glad that you're home safe. Bart's expression grew serious as he took her hands in his. Willow, I've had a lot of time to think on the trail, about my future, about what I want. Willow's heart began to race. And what conclusions did you reach? That I've been a hired hand long enough, he said firmly. Mr. Kennedy offered me a partnership in the Diamond K, a small share, but a start. Or I could use my savings and the bonus to make a down payment on the old Miller place that's up for sale. It's small, just 100 acres, but good water and decent grazing. Your own ranch, Willow said softly, understanding what this meant to him. That's wonderful, Bart. But here's the thing, he continued, his blue eyes intent on hers. I don't want either option if it means a future without you in it. Willow's breath caught in her throat as Bart reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a simple gold ring with a tiny pearl. I know it's not much, he said apologetically. Not what a lady like you deserves, but it's honest, like my feelings for you. He dropped to one knee right there in the schoolhouse, still holding her hands. Willow Bennett, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Willow's eyes as she looked down at this strong, honest man who had literally carried her through fire and into a new life she had never imagined for herself. Yes, she whispered. Then more strongly, yes, Bart, I would be honored to be your wife. His face broke into a smile of such joy that it transformed his usually serious features. He slid the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, then stood and gathered her into his arms again, this time sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Word of their engagement spread through Ruby City like wildfire. Harriet was delighted, though she pretended to be surprised when Bart formally asked for her blessing that evening. You've had my blessing since the day you pulled her from that fire, she told him with a warm embrace. I couldn't ask for a finer husband for my niece. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning, not just for their wedding, but for their future. Bart decided to take the risk on purchasing the Miller property, believing that building something of his own would provide a better foundation for their married life than remaining an employee, even a partner, at the Diamond K. It won't be easy at first, he warned Willow as they walked the boundaries of what would become their home. The house needs work, the fences are in disrepair, and I'll be starting with a small herd. We'll have to be careful with money. I don't need luxury, Willow assured him, surveying the modest cabin that sat on a rise overlooking a small creek. And I can continue teaching, at least for a while. My salary will help until the ranch is established. Bart looked at her with such love and admiration that Willow felt her heart might burst. You're remarkable, do you know that? Most women would balk at the prospect of such a hard beginning. I didn't come west looking for an easy life, she reminded him with a smile. I came seeking purpose and adventure. I believe I've found both with you. Their wedding took place in early September, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. The schoolchildren formed an honor guard outside the church, tossing flower petals as Willow and Bart emerged as husband and wife. The reception was held in the town square, with tables groaning under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in Ruby City. As dusk fell and lanterns were lit around the square, Bart led his bride in their first dance as a married couple. The town's small band played a slow, sweet melody as they moved together under the stars. Happy Mrs. Vaughn, Bart murmured against her ear. Completely, Willow replied, savoring the sound of her new name. And you, Mr. Vaughn. More than I ever thought possible, he assured her, drawing her closer as they danced. Though I must warn you, I'm not looking forward to sharing you with a passel of schoolchildren every day, Willow laughed softly, just until the spring term ends. Then perhaps I'll have other responsibilities to occupy me. Bart pulled back slightly to look at her face, a question in his eyes. A ranch needs children to inherit it someday, Willow explained, blushing at her own boldness. I thought, perhaps by next year. The joy that spread across Bart's face was all the answer she needed. He kissed her, regardless of the watching townspeople, a kiss full of promise for their future. Their first months of marriage were just as challenging as Bart had predicted. Moving into the cabin, which they worked to improve room by room, establishing the beginnings of their herd, and balancing Willow's teaching duties with the demands of ranch life kept them both exhausted but fulfilled. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows by November. Bart worked tirelessly to ensure their livestock had shelter and feed, often returning to the cabin after dark, chilled to the bone but satisfied with their progress. Willow proved to be as capable a ranch wife as she was a teacher, learning quickly from both Bart and neighboring women how to manage the household tasks that were so different from city living. She made the small cabin comfortable and welcoming, a true home where they could end each day together, sharing their triumphs and challenges. As Christmas approached, Willow prepared a special surprise for Bart. She had suspected for several weeks but wanted to be certain before sharing the news. When Dr. Anderson confirmed her suspicions during his monthly visit to town, Willow could hardly contain her excitement. On Christmas Eve, after they had exchanged modest gifts by the light of their small tree, Willow handed Bart one final package, a tiny pair of hand-knitted booties. Bart stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Willow, are you?" She nodded, tears of happiness brimming in her eyes. "In June, the doctor says, our family is already growing." Bart dropped to his knees before her chair, placing his hands reverently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered in awe, "our child. Are you pleased?" Willow asked, running her fingers through his dark hair. "Pleased," Bart repeated, looking up at her with eyes shining with emotion. "Willow, this is everything I never dared to dream of. You've made me the happiest man in the territory, in the whole country, I'd wager." He gathered her carefully into his arms, as though she had suddenly become fragile, precious cargo. "I promise you," he vowed against her hair, "I will be the best father I can be. Our child will never doubt they are loved and wanted." Willow held him close, knowing in her heart that he would keep that promise, just as he had kept every promise since the day he had carried her from the flames. Spring brought new beginnings to the Vaughn ranch. The cattle Bart had purchased began to calve, increasing their herd. The gardens Willow had planned during the long winter nights began to flourish under her care. And as her body changed with the growing life inside her, Willow found herself surrounded by the support of the community she had come to love. Harriet visited often, bringing supplies and advice. The women of Ruby City organized a baby shower, presenting Willow with handmade quilts, gowns, and practical items for the new arrival. Even Bart's former employer, Mr. Kennedy, sent a beautifully crafted wooden cradle as a gift. Willow finished the school term in May, introducing the children to the teacher who would replace her temporarily after the baby's birth. Many of the students cried at the news, though Willow promised she would return once the baby was old enough. "You've changed this town," Bart told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their improved cabin, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "Before you came, most folks just accepted that education here would always be basic at best. Now they're talking about building a proper schoolhouse with multiple rooms, maybe even bringing in another teacher to help you." Willow smiled, resting her hands on her rounded belly where their child kicked vigorously. "This community has so much potential. I'm just glad to be part of its growth." Bart covered her hands with his own, marveling at the movement beneath them. "Our child will have opportunities we never had," he said with certainty. "A combination of your intelligence and my stubbornness, heaven help us all." Willow laughed, leaning against his strong shoulder. "I was thinking more your courage and my determination. Either way, this child will be extraordinary." As June approached, Bart became increasingly protective, rarely leaving Willow alone despite her assurances that first babies often arrived late. He arranged for Harriet to stay with them as the expected time drew near, and Dr. Anderson promised to ride out to the ranch at the first sign of labor. But their careful plans went awry when a summer thunderstorm swelled the creek to dangerous levels, washing out the bridge that connected their property to the main road to town. Willow's labor began during the height of the storm, with no way for the doctor to reach them. "Bart," Willow gasped as another contraction seized her, "you need to ride for Mrs. Peterson. She's attended more births than anyone in the county." "I'm not leaving you," Bart insisted, his face pale with worry as he held her hand. "You must," Willow said firmly between pains. Harriet will stay with me, but we need Mrs. Peterson's experience. The bridge to town is gone, but if you ride north to the Peterson farm, you can cross at the shallow part." Seeing the sense in her words, Bart reluctantly agreed. He kissed her forehead, promised to return as quickly as possible, and rode off into the rain-soaked night. The hours that followed were the most challenging of Willow's life. Harriet did her best to comfort and assist her niece, but as the labor intensified, both women grew increasingly anxious about the absence of more experienced help. Just when Willow felt she couldn't endure another moment, the cabin door burst open to admit Bart, soaking wet and accompanied by the sturdy figure of Mrs. Peterson, the local midwife. "Let's see what we've got here," Mrs. Peterson said briskly, immediately taking charge of the situation. She examined Willow efficiently, then nodded with satisfaction. "Everything's progressing just as it should. This baby will be here before dawn." Her calm confidence reassured both Willow and Bart. Under the midwife's expert guidance, Willow found new reserves of strength. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the strong cry of a newborn filled the cabin. "A son," Mrs. Peterson announced, placing the squalling infant on Willow's chest after quickly cleaning and wrapping him. "A fine, healthy boy." Bart, who had remained steadfastly by Willow's side throughout the ordeal, stared in wonder at the tiny red face of his son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's dark hair, which already showed signs of the same cowlick that plagued his own. "What will you call him?" Harriet asked, wiping tears of joy from her eyes. Willow and Bart exchanged a look, having discussed names many times over the past months. "William," Willow said softly. "William Thomas Vaughn, after both our fathers." "A strong name for a strong boy, Mrs. Peterson approved as she continued to tend to Willow. "He'll need it, growing up on a ranch." Later, when Willow had been made comfortable and the baby was sleeping peacefully in his new cradle, Bart sat beside his wife, holding her hand as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "I have never been so terrified," he admitted quietly, "nor so proud. You are the strongest person I've ever known, Willow Vaughn." Willow smiled tiredly. "We did it together, just as we've done everything since the day we met." "Since I carried you from that burning barn," Bart said, the memory still vivid in his mind. "Did you ever imagine that day that we'd end up here?" "No," Willow admitted, "but I'm grateful every day for the fire that brought you to me, even if it was terrifying at the time." Bart leaned down to kiss her gently. "I'd walk through fire for you 100 times over," he vowed. "You and our son are everything to me." As if recognizing his father's voice, little William stirred in his cradle, making small, snuffling sounds. Bart carefully lifted him, cradling the tiny body against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. "Welcome to the world, William Thomas," he murmured to his son. "Your mama and I have been waiting for you. We've got a fine life planned for you here on our land." Watching her husband with their child, Willow felt her heart overflow with love. From the ashes of a burning barn had risen everything she had ever wanted but never dared to imagine: true partnership, deep love, and now, a family of her own under the vast Idaho sky. In the years that followed, the Vaughn Ranch prospered under Bart's careful management and Willow's supportive partnership. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Catherine Harriet, named for both grandmothers. Willow returned to teaching part-time once Catherine was weaned, helping to establish Ruby City's new school building, which now boasted 3 separate classrooms and a small library. Her vision for education in the frontier town was gradually becoming reality, supported by a community that had come to value learning as essential for their children's futures. Bart expanded their ranch operations, breeding horses as well as cattle, earning a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock. The modest cabin was eventually replaced by a proper farmhouse with enough rooms for their growing family and frequent guests. On the 10th anniversary of the barn fire that had brought them together, Bart surprised Willow with a special gift, a locket containing a small charred piece of wood. "From the beam that nearly separated us forever," he explained as she opened it curiously. "I went back after the Hanson place was rebuilt and found it, kept it all these years as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Willow asked, touched by the unusual memento. That sometimes what looks like disaster is actually the beginning of something beautiful, Bart said, taking her hands in his. That day could have ended in tragedy, but instead it gave me you, our children, this life we've built together. Willow closed her fingers around the locket, understanding completely. From flames to forever, she said softly. From flames to forever, Bart agreed, gathering her into his arms as he had done on that fateful day, holding her as if he would never let go. Outside, their children played in the summer sunshine, their laughter carrying on the breeze across the prosperous ranch that had grown from a dream into reality. Inside, Willow and Bart sealed their decade of love with a kiss that held the same passion as their first, tempered now by years of shared struggle and joy, of building a life neither had imagined possible before fate and fire had brought them together in Ruby City.